everybody. Welcome back to the Everyday Night. I'm Joe.
And I'm Jeff.
And Jeff, we are continuing our discussion of 1933 Harper's Magazine article, What the Young Man Should Know.
Yes,
And
hard do.
part two. Last time we spoke about the first batch of these summarized as an enumerated list. And we'll provide, again, a link to the original article below.
It's an amusing read, I found. I mean, considering our distance of time, but the article, the guy describing it, if you put yourself in the right frame of mind to read it, it's quite. I found it quite witty.
I think he was a good writer.
Yeah,
So
it's a very editorialized kind of thing he's doing. As you said, this is an enumerated list. It's in more of a form of an essay in his article, but for the purposes of doing this efficiently, as ever we do, we've found an enumerated list here. So
yes. So going on with the next one, he should know the rudiments of gambling, but gambling might be placed on the same plane as drink. The less use one has for it, the better.
Wise, I think,
Yes.
in general.
Now, I think that earlier he said something about knowing at least one, what?
Knowing one card game.
One card game.
Yes.
And that's sort of, I don't have much use for gambling. I think but I do find, and I have before played a friendly game of, what's it called? Poker, I think. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've played. I didn't play myself, but my uncle used to play this game he called Dice.
Yes.
And I picked up a little bit of that,
Actually, when
just
I
from
was
listening from the dining room.
when I was in the 6th grade and we were going on a class trip, my father was one of the adult chaperones. And on this couple-hour bus trip to our destination, my father taught all of us how to play poker.
Much of the chagrin of many parents, I would suspect.
Well, they didn't know about it. It was, and
Until the kids come home and start using slang like, yeah.
And so's your old man. Rebuckling their knickerbockers below the knee.
Thank you for picking that reference up, sir.
You're welcome.
Music man.
So I think I don't think one needs to be a world-class baccarat player unless one's working for British Secret Service, and I think it's interesting because Bond was not only could gamble, but he was certainly an alcoholic.
Yeah. Oh yes. But could handle his drink, right?
Yes. Yeah.
You never saw Bond drunk.
Well, not when he was on duty. I think he was.
Well, never in the movies. In the books, he recognized when he was having too much to drink.
Well, but in the movie, one of the movies, he was.
Casino Royale doesn't count.
No. In like the last one, I think he was.
Well, these are the last ones are not Ian Fleming.
Yeah, I know. So anyway, I think they're still canon for me. Higher than almost any other accomplishment on the list is knowing music. There is no reason why any young man who is not absolutely tone deaf should not learn how to play one musical instrument well enough for it to be a self-resource and a tolerable pleasure to others.
I wonder what he means exactly there by self-resource.
Well, where you can simply sit down and play music and for your own amusement. This was before television and the internet and the early days of radio programming.
Okay.
So I think I would I think it's useful to play music. The same reason that I think it's useful to learn cursive writing in school.
I
Um,
the connection there.
because cursive writing, and a lot of people don't understand this from a developmental point of view. You're learning cursive, you are the way you end a letter changes depending on the next letter that's coming. You have to anticipate the next letter to
Mhm.
come.
Yep.
And so you have to be doing one thing while thinking of the next thing. And it's
Yeah.
very similar if you are reading music and playing an instrument. You
Yep.
are playing this note, but you are
You're reading.
preparing for the next note.
Yeah,
And
yes, yes.
right. Because if you play this one, then read the next one, play it, then read the next, you are off time, you're slow.
Yeah,
So,
you're not playing music. You're just reproducing notes.
right. So I think it's useful. But I would say it's useful to know, he says know music, and I agree. It's useful to be exposed to a wide variety of music and to understand what music is, and to be able to listen to it with appreciation. And that includes all forms of music, all genres, all types. Um,
I mean, you
and
don't have to like them all.
no,
Just
but you should
you don't have to
understand them.
like. You don't have to like every piece in a museum.
Right. Well,
If
and
you did, if you're
I was just going to say that people should, I think, also understand art and visual arts. And that
Mhm.
doesn't mean you have to like something or be moved by it, but you should have a passable knowledge of what it is and what it means and why. And one of the things that has I have greatly enjoyed doing is going through a museum with friends or students, which I've also done, and talking to them about how to see, how to look, and what they're seeing. And that's been I enjoy doing that. Um,
Well,
and
it occurs to me as we're talking about this that you don't have to like every piece in a museum. In fact, if you went into a museum and you liked everything you saw, it's probably a pretty poor museum.
well, I would say that's not necessarily true, because there are some museums that are just many, most pieces on display are gems. But I mean, it tends to be you more likely the person doesn't know what they're seeing. I have certainly been in places. I would remember being in the Sistine Chapel. First time I was in the Sistine Chapel, and just looking in awe and amazement at the ceiling. And a group came in, looked up and said, okay, saw it, and left. And
Right.
so I think learning how to see and learning how to look, learning how to analyze what you're seeing or what you're hearing in terms of music, I think that's really the essential skill.
And you and I both have similar initial, training, and you have a more fine arts background than I do, granted, but I do understand the craft, and I do understand composition, and
Yeah.
you know, and there are some pieces I think you go into a museum and you say this. There are pieces where you go, this piece only appeals to this rarefied air of artists who are so jaded by everything else that this is what they are saying is great, and
Yeah.
it's not.
Yeah. Um, I think I've certainly gone through a museum with people who would go, ooh, look at this. And I said, yes, it's old, but it's not good. It's only here because it's old. It
Right.
wasn't good when it was made, and it's not any better now. It's just older. I've also been in a museum. Um, I think it was the Art Institute of Chicago in their new wing. And you walk in this huge room, and there's a tree, appears to be a tree on the floor. And I had to read the card to understand what it was.
Right. And
And
see, that's failure.
yes, because what what he did, the guy who was the artist, I hate to call him that, he saw a tree that was beautiful that had fallen. So he got a crew of people, they chopped it up into sections, shipped it to Japan, had a master Japanese wood carver carve a likeness of the tree out of wood, and that shipped it back, and that's the art piece that this guy put his name on.
Right.
Right.
This
So
is this is that's like AI. I mean,
well, I thought it was, yeah, it was somebody else doing it for him. He had an idea, but he didn't do the doing.
and
I thought it was fraud perpetrated on the museum and the public. Um,
for me, the quintessential modern art that I think escapes understanding, and I'm pretty sure this was at the Detroit Institute of Art in the museum. It was a canvas. I want to say it was 4 feet wide, 3 feet wide by 6 or 7 feet tall. Red,
yeah.
paint red, with a white 1 inch white stripe down the center of it
Okay.
vertically.
So I'll tell you about another work by the same painter. I was taking group of students through, and they walked right past a painting, and it was about similar dimensions, 4 by 8 maybe. I called them back. I said, "You walked past this, and it's a red canvas with a rectangle of one color in the bottom, another on the top, with soft edges." And I said, "Stand here and look at the center of this. Which of the rectangles is coming forward, which is receding?" So, well, the bottom one seems to be coming forward. Okay, now take a step, stand here. Oh, now the top one is. Okay, now stand here. What do you see? They're moving.
Yeah, sure.
So I said, that's you walked right past it. That's a point of this piece. So um, I wanted them to understand what was behind the creation of that. I am completely unmoved by works like that. They do not move me. I understand, but it's again, and it's the whole point we're saying, understanding something does not mean you like it.
Right. Yeah. And that's all I'm saying.
Right.
This other piece of mine, I mean, I could see because I could tell it was brush painted because there's subtle variations in the
Right.
red color. But it looked to me like he put a piece of masking tape down the middle, painted it all, red, and then pulled the masking tape off. And there was, I mean, if if you're saying, if you have to read you have to read the
Yeah.
artist's explanation of it.
Well, I think that
I think it fails.
yeah, I think the modern art, visual arts industry and collectors and how things are assigned value is a racket.
It's
It's
arbitrary.
yeah, it's somebody decide it's well, and it's manipulated too.
Yeah.
Somebody decides something, somebody with clout decide something's of value, suddenly it has value, you know.
Yeah.
Um, for
Well, that
me, that's one of the reasons for me that conceptual art always fell flat, because it separated the concept from the technique of execution. And for me, and it's my own personal definition, and the kind of art I strive to make, is it's got concept, it's got meaning, it's got technique, it's got execution, it's
right.
got all of those
I agree.
together.
Agree.
Um, that
And
I
this
think
is,
that's also one of the problems, in addition to theft, I have with AI.
we can talk about that as a different thing.
Yes.
What I was getting to though, and this is we're both making my point of, if you go into a museum and you like everything, you're not being exposed to anything new.
Right.
And whether you like it or not, being exposed to it is important,
Yeah.
because it allows you then the ability to discern what's good or what you like and what you don't like. You at least are making that distinction between what you think is good and what you don't understand. If it's all that's all it is you don't understand it, then now you realize there's something you don't understand.
Right.
An educated, curious person would want to at least understand it.
Right.
So,
One of my art history professors, in fact, a few of them, um, required us to only write about things we saw in person. So a lot of trips to the Art Institute of Chicago, um, so we could look at things in person to write about, because there's a huge difference between simply seeing a picture of something, reproduction in a book,
yeah.
and that the scale is different, or even seeing it as a slide and seeing it in person. And I remember 1980, the Museum of Modern Art in New York um, uh, emptied their collection and filled it only with Picasso, because they were sending Guernica back to Spain.
Okay.
And Guernica is a painting of a particular horrific war.
Right.
And you see it in the books, and it's just like this. It's enormous.
Hmm.
And I remember walking up the stairs, and there it is on a wall opposite the stairs. And I almost fell backwards down the stairs, because it's such a powerful
Hmm.
image that feels like it physically pushes you. And so out of curiosity, I stepped to the side and I watched other people come up the stairs and then stagger back by this. They're lucky they didn't have um, an accident with people falling backwards down the stairs because of that. So
I
it's
suspect
very
there was a
different.
I suspect there was a certain amount of psychological placement of that at the top of a stair.
It could have been, yeah, but it was also dangerous.
Okay.
Moving on.
Yeah.
A civilized man. Now, we could do a lot just talking about the word civilized.
True.
Certainly, he's talking about it from a Western perspective. Civilization, what does civilization mean? Interesting question. A civilized man should know how to read. The ability to read, or rather the habit of reading, is very rare even among intelligent people. It has to be taught and kept up if it is not to become rusty.
Yeah. You see it all the time.
Yeah.
I think audiobooks are destroying people's ability to read and comprehend.
Um,
I think they have their place, but they are supplanting actual reading for
well,
people.
I think they have their place. I do think they have their place. But I think sitting and people sometimes listen to audiobooks while they're doing something else.
Yes,
If you're reading, you are only reading.
agreed.
So I think it feeds somewhat into the fallacy of multitasking, which is not, people don't multitask. They serially single task and
Yeah,
move back and forth. Um, So I think I think there's a purpose for audiobooks, but if you're only trying to consume the content, the what, and you're not enjoying how it's done, then I think something is missing from the experience of reading.
Well, yeah, and I think that there is the like you say, people are I mean, maybe it's while you're driving or something. The only time I ever
Yeah.
really listen to audio podcasts and that kind of thing is long distance driving.
And we encourage people to listen to this podcast while they're driving.
Yeah, well, yeah, um, or in any situation, you know? But
Sure.
but we don't. There's no written version. There's no transcription version of what we're doing. We are having a conversation between two
Yes. Yes.
live people. That's not the same as reading a
A
book
written
that
word.
has been written to be read. So, and I think that act of sitting down and being alone in your mind with the words in front of you is useful.
Yeah.
I think that it
It
helps
helps you.
tune your brain.
And as somebody said, reading is to the mind what exercise is to the body. So
Sure. So
he should have knowledge of at least one foreign language, French or German, preferably both.
that's a very European
Yeah.
mindset there.
Well, I remember French was the language of diplomacy and German was the language of science, was what we were told in school.
And do you remember from Shibumi uh, the main character's mother had a whole thing. They were both polyglots, and
Yeah.
his mother, and it was you spoke French to your lover, you spoke German when conducting business, and you spoke to your servants in English.
Yeah. Wow.
And I think there was 4 or 5 of them actually. Those are the three I remember most.
Yeah.
But but I think at least in this country, I think the most useful language to learn would be Spanish.
Probably. Yeah.
Um, but if you're traveling abroad, whatever. And
Well,
I
I would say that if you're traveling abroad, make an effort before you go to learn a little bit so you can at least say hello, good day, thank
¿Dónde
you,
está el baño?
thank you, where's the bathroom, dos cervezas, por favor. Um, learn how to order 2 beers in any language. I think it's useful. Make an effort.
Yeah.
Some places will appreciate the effort you make more than others, but learn
I'm
learn a bit.
I'm the as I said, we're going to be doing a European cruise, and that's challenging because there's Dutch, French, German, Swiss, and I think if I get a little bit of German and a little bit of French, I'll be okay.
Yeah,
And the ship will be on. Everybody speaks English, and that's not.
I found German to be very difficult. I have had much better luck with Italian, much better success with Italian. It seems more logical to me,
Well,
surprisingly, than
oddly, since German is more like English.
except the syntax. Always the the thing that two things that threw me about German were the syntax, because the way verbs
People
compound
talk
verbs
like
go at
people
the
talk like
end.
Yoda.
What's that?
People talk like Yoda.
Yes. But the other thing was it's a gendered language, and the genders are not obvious to me, were not obvious to me from the word itself. In Italian, the genders are of the words of nouns tend to be pretty straightforward based on the
Hmm.
noun itself.
Okay.
What does the noun sound does the noun end with? You can, for 80 85% of the time you can tell what the gender of the noun is. So anyway,
So I
um,
think a certainly not a disdain for language.
right.
I I think that's a common failing of Americans is that I don't need to learn another language. Everybody knows English. And if you're in this country, you better be speaking English or go back where you came from. I
No,
think that's a
that's
deplorable
terrible.
attitude.
Yeah, I agree. I do think some of the um, translation devices, it's
Hmm.
not quite a universal translator yet, but there are devices you can speak into, you attach it to your phone, or it's an app, you speak into it, and the voice that comes out is in the language you choose. And somebody responds and translates it into your language. I think that's tremendously useful.
Yeah,
But
and I'll probably lean on that a little bit on our trip.
I think if you make an effort, if you learn, again, hello, thank you, goodbye, good evening, good day, and a few other things.
I think
How
what I
much
would,
is this? Where is that? Simple things like that.
and I think I'm going to practice the phrase, my insert language is not very good.
Yes.
My German is not very good. My French is not very good. I don't know any Dutch. Please
Yeah.
help me.
um, well, and on that point, he should know how to travel well, efficiently, without fuss or complaint.
Yes, and I think that is specifically aimed at the American audience he's
Yes.
writing for.
I have found we found that when we've been looking at places online, looking at reviews, when deciding to go somewhere like a resort or a hotel or something, and the reviews are, it was terrible. I couldn't get Miller Lite. It was
Oh,
terrible. The only chocolate they had was local. It was terrible. They didn't have it's like, okay, Mark Twain, I think it was Mark Twain. Again, I should check, but I think I have checked before, said that there's a difference between a tourist and a traveler.
hmm,
And a tourist goes somewhere and wants it to be as much like home as possible. And a traveler goes somewhere and wants it to be as different from home as possible. And
interesting.
yeah, so travel well, efficiently, without fuss or complaint. Um, a young man should be able to express himself clearly before a crowd of strangers without shyness, muddle, or a pathetic resort to so much has been said and well said, or I did
In
not
quotes.
expect to be called on.
Well, yeah, I know someone who's in our organization who is literally kind of his job to speak in public
Yeah,
and will always start anything he says with, unaccustomed as I am to public speaking.
yeah,
Just and it's just a joke now, all right,
yeah.
because everybody knows who he is. But yeah, I mean, not every, very few people are naturally comfortable speaking in front of a crowd.
Well, and I wasn't,
No, I mean,
so I worked at it,
yeah,
and
exactly.
it's when in classes I've taught, I've often um, done a class on business presentations. And so I say, who doesn't like speaking in public? And the ones who raise their hands, students raise their hand, I make them come to the front of the class. And
Right.
we do some improv to get them. I said, get over it here. This is a safe environment. Nobody's
Hmm.
going to mock you. Nobody's going to laugh at you. This part of it isn't graded. You're not going to, get used to it here. Get over it here. So the first time you have to speak in a professional setting isn't the first time you've spoken in front of people.
Right. Yeah. And I
um,
think that's good in general. I think it's useful professionally.
yep.
Um, yeah. shyness muddle. There's a everybody's insecure about something,
Yeah, sure.
right? And the old saw of, well, just picture everybody in their underwear or picture everybody naked. That's just a distraction. That's
Yeah,
not making you a better speaker.
no.
So
I would say practice.
yeah, yeah.
I think of it as
Preparation and practice are what
what was that? Preparation
preparation
and practice.
and practice. People,
Yep.
you and I are called upon occasionally to speak in
Yes.
large groups of people, and I've I've tried to pass this on. It's like you see me sitting there quietly, waiting to speak, and when I'm spontaneously called upon to speak, I've been thinking for the last 20 minutes about what I'm going to
Yeah,
say,
me too. I do that too.
composing in my head the order and which words to use, what
Yep.
rhythm, what kind of cadence is going to be appropriate for this. All of that, and that takes a certain amount of practice and training
Yeah.
to get it
And
right.
the more you practice that, the easier it gets. I
Confident you
just
become, just like practicing anything.
right. And I tell people there's like a filing cabinet in my head, and I need to speak about something. I think, okay, I here, put those together, this or no, there you go. Here, okay, talk about it. So, um,
I think that is related to the uh, I'm not sure what to call it, the concept of a mind palace.
oh, the memory palace, yeah. Yeah, absolutely related to that. Yeah. Um, the British adult can get to his feet, propose a toast, introduce a stranger, voice a civic protest, heckle a windbag politician, and give utterance to an unembarrassed thought. Um, I think he's talking about a certain class of, and I used class because it was a very classed society,
Yes.
still is in some ways. Um, when he's talking about that, I do not think that was going to be everybody.
No.
Um, so,
But from an American standpoint, I mean, heckling a windbag politician, I'm not sure where that comes in. I mean,
well, picture the English Parliament
oh,
versus
yeah,
the French.
I
Yeah,
absolutely understand the setting that he's doing there, but I mean, uh, but I think the other things, proposing a toast,
yeah,
we've talked about that in
yeah,
our podcast previously. Here's some pat phrases you can use to do a toast so that, again, you can practice and you don't have to be nervous about.
right,
Introducing a stranger. These were things we were taught as children.
yeah,
Here's how you are introduced, and you learn by being introduced how you introduce somebody else.
yeah,
In our organization, we have these sort of unspoken, unwritten sort of rules. We have these sort of pretend ranks and hierarchies that we adopt for ourselves, and you always introduce you you present the lower ranking person to the higher ranking person.
yes,
That's the proper way this is done. Or so and so, high ranking person, may I introduce this lower
yes.
ranking person to you? That that kind of thing. And that makes it a practice that makes it easy in
Well,
other.
and we've talked about etiquette before,
Yes.
and the purpose for etiquette, so the social rules, are to avoid causing someone to feel embarrassed.
Right.
And that's the reason for them. Um, but they have become sometimes their own thing.
Sort of a gatekeeping.
Yes,
You
exactly.
can you can tell someone's breeding by their inability to follow
Ooh,
the
so,
rules.
yes.
Hmm.
So, yes.
So so but it's an interesting point you make, because you talked about that sort of caste,
Yes,
that baked in caste system that the British still sort of have, that the American mind utterly rejects.
yeah,
And so therefore an American has a hard time putting themselves in a humbling position, right? But I think that also makes them nervous and shy because they know somebody knows that they're not in a position to be an equal to somebody, and yet they tell themselves that I am their equal. I have to be their equal. Nobody's better than me. We're all equals, even though this person has accomplished all these things. And then it becomes rude because they don't know how to approach it
Yeah.
humbly.
Yes.
They can only approach it crassly.
Yeah.
So I think this is a skill, being able to to be polite and be somewhat humble in the presence of somebody else.
Yes. And I think just going back to the heckle a windbag politician, that has I'd say that people arrogantly have assumed the right to heckle um, someone who's not a windbag, but they simply disagree with. And I think it's a breach of decorum
Yes.
in and that I think is inappropriate.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, but they're getting elected now.
yes, yes,
But that's
um,
a whole other discussion.
yes. Um, he should have a man should command the elementary tool of written language and be able to put simple things on paper in clear words. I think that's what we were talking about before, but that
Yeah.
is that is really challenging for people to do.
Yes.
And
Yep.
I know that my years of English classes in high school were structured so as to we learned how to write a clear sentence,
Hmm.
a clear paragraph, a short paper, a longer paper.
Punctuate clearly and correctly,
Yes.
where to capitalize, where to use a semicolon.
And I, I still remember my senior English teacher in high school. We all turned in our first paper and he handed them all back and said, none of you said anything. You took every possible side of everything. You didn't, what you need to do is say something and then throughout your paper, you defend it.
Hmm.
And even if I don't agree with you, that's the structure I want you to follow. And it's huge, significant effect on my writing because it was not just how to structure a sentence, because all our sentences were perfectly structured.
Right.
It was why are you doing it? What are you saying with it? So I had a chance a couple of years ago, going back for a reunion to visit him, and I gave him a copy of my first book.
Huh. Nice.
And I said, you know, you made a difference in the way I write. Here's a copy of my first book.
I had an English teacher when I was in college. Talk about the difference between analyzing something and merely describing it in a
Yeah,
in a paper like you're talking about, where it's
yeah,
not fiction or just, you're you're writing to a purpose. You need to
yes.
analyze and direct your reader's thought. You're not just describing something. You're not just filling the paper with a sentence that says the same thing over and over.
Or like, you know, what is it? However many pages of description in Moby Dick of the details of a whaling ship
Yeah,
that like okay.
maybe fascinating to him, but I always found, um, after seeing them as a kid, right? You saw the Disney movie of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Yes.
And then I found the Jules Verne version and read it. And I'm like, oh, it's a travel log of,
Well, and so when I remember because I in junior high, oh my our our librarian in junior high, terrible, terrible. Because library class, I was looking forward to reading, and she would not let us read while she was talking, and she often would talk for the entire class, telling us
ugh.
terrible, boring stories. And I wanted to read all those great adventures, Jules Verne, you know, um,
Edgar Rice Burroughs.
Edgar, yeah, all of that stuff, Three Musketeers, all of those things. And she said, no, they're too advanced for you.
Ah,
And once again,
that is
as I,
terrible.
once again, I told my mother about this. My mother came to school, went into there, went up to her and said,
I think marched is the word you're looking for.
yes, he has my permission to read anything he wants to read, anything in this entire building. He may read. If there's something he doesn't understand, we will discuss it with him. And
and and you will not dissuade him or just
yes,
limit him in any way.
well, and that was implied, but
Mhm.
here she was. And she's just, that was it. And I could read anything I wanted. So
I saw a great comic, I say comic, but it's like a little graphic panel, 4 panel cartoon of this woman bringing this child in and says to a librarian who's putting books away, doing a
okay.
librarian thing.
Oh, I
And
think I
it's a
know what.
young, right?
Yeah.
The librarian's a young man, and it's this mother or a teacher. I'm not even sure at this point, but with the child, it says, um, "You'd let this boy check out these books," and he says, "Yes." He says, "Well, they're too advanced for him." He says, "I don't agree." And she says, "Well, I just want him to read at his level." And he says, "Well, and I just want him to know that he shouldn't have any limits."
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Um, he should have a good workable understanding of the structure of business, investments, and banks.
In 33, I imagine that was extremely top of mind for people.
Yes. Well, I think it's still important, but
It's still good, but it has gotten so complex.
it has. I think it's important for political understanding as well, because the structure of business, investment, and banks, I would add lobbying, influence peddling,
Yeah,
corrupt politicians, um,
monopolization of corporations.
right, all of those things.
Yeah.
I think it's really important. And I think it's important not only for the conduct of your own personal affairs, you should understand, like my sixth grade teacher, Mr. Dale P. Harper, U.S. Navy retired, um, taught us how to um, write a check and balance a checkbook.
Yeah,
And as a class, we bought one share of stock, followed it all year, made a small profit at the end of the year. When we sold it, we actually went to like a little investment brokerage
mhm.
place, uh, bought the share, sold it, had a party with the proceeds at the end of the year.
Sure.
So
Sounds
um,
great.
let every educated man, as a necessary part of his education, be thrown into the muddy stream of American industry and see what it is like to swim alone on daily wages. Yes,
I It's hard to argue with that.
I absolutely agree. I think there are people who should understand what it's like to have to work for,
Yeah,
you know,
there is certainly a privileged class, many of them in politics,
yeah,
who have never worked outside of fundraising and campaigning for,
or daddy's business.
yeah, or maybe a couple hours a week at a charity office, or you
There
know,
were there were people I knew in college when I was an undergrad from very wealthy, very well-known families,
mhm.
and they were not overly concerned with grades. They simply had to graduate and they had a guaranteed position
Yep.
and moved into, it was,
Or
um,
they were waiting for their congressional internship
yeah,
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah,
Um,
and this is people talk about like I'm going to go get this tiny little bit political here, and I don't want this to become a huge tangent, but the people talking about Trump as a man of the people, and I go, he has never bought a gallon of milk in his life. He has
no,
never gone into a store and had to buy his own groceries,
no,
ever.
right,
He has no idea what your life is like. He can't relate to you.
right.
And that's the kind of thing we're talking about here. Is it somebody who has lived this sort of privileged, protected, rarefied life? Yeah, they ought to be able to understand what people are going through and not just pay lip service to it.
Yeah, yep. And I think somebody having to work for a living, I think that makes, I think that makes a difference. People experience that.
Yeah.
I think it does.
And I know one person who, went to college and had that job waiting if they wanted it. But their father, I think wisely, told them and said, "No, you're for a year, you're on your own.
No,
I'm not giving you're out of college, you've got a degree, you can get a job, go do that. You don't get this job until you've held a job for somebody else."
yeah,
And I think that's incredibly wise.
yeah. I think it was Warren Buffett, a very wealthy investment um,
At one
investor guy.
time, the richest man in the United
Yeah,
States.
he said uh, somebody asked him what he was leaving to his children. He said, "I'm leaving them enough money to do whatever they want, but not to do nothing."
Mm. Okay.
Okay, yeah. He should, before reaching 22, have done something because he wanted to, whether other people wanted him to do it or not.
Okay.
Yeah,
I,
yeah.
I like
Burning
that.
Man, here we come.
Burning Man. Yeah. I mean, I think it's the sort of I want to uh, not just your what's the
Sow your wild oats.
yeah, but there's a I was looking for a I think it's a Dutch word for the Amish practice of
Oh, Rumspringa.
Rumspringa. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
It's not just like going off and sowing your wild oats or doing something crazy one time before you settle down and knuckle
yeah,
down and put your nose to the grindstone or whatever. So yeah, I think it's the I want to pursue this thing for a little while, and it may turn out to be terrible, but I'm doing it because I want to do it.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, all right.
yeah,
Rather than just following the path that your parents have laid out for you and going to the right church and marrying the person that would suit you politically or
yeah,
communally,
yeah,
whatever. You know what I mean?
yeah. Um, he should not acquire property unless he needs it. Insensitiveness to his personal property, unless, of course, it is extraordinarily beautiful, is a desirable skill for any man to have. It must be learned and worked at. That makes no insensitiveness to his,
Insensitivity, I think, would be the better word, but
but it should be sensitivity. But unless it is
no, I think he's
extraordinary,
talking about the opposite. He should care less about his property
oh,
unless it is extraordinarily beautiful.
so yeah, learn it and work at it. Okay.
Yeah,
I
as
don't
a
know if he's talking about real estate or if
I
he's
don't
talking
it doesn't
about
sound like it because
possessions.
yes,
Possessions. Yeah,
yeah. I think
that makes sense to me.
don't surround yourself with possessions that you
That
can't get rid of.
don't spark joy in you.
Right. Unless it's extraordinarily beautiful.
Yeah, in which case it
Yes, it
could.
does spark joy. It's like, okay, I not bad philosophy, I guess. It's kind of Zen in a way
Yeah,
that you shouldn't become attached to things. Um, all right.
Now, the last one is exceedingly odd. And
And it is the closing sentence of his article.
yes, unusual though this young man may be, he should not seem so. Is not a parent's basic ambition for his child that he be very different from other people, yet manage to seem almost exactly like them?
Well, I think parents, not being one myself, but I think that parents want their child to be exceptional, but they kind of want them to fit in too.
Right.
That's right. Is that what we're talking about here?
That's what it sounds like. And I think I've got a problem with this because it is, it is saying be exceptional and a conformist at the same time. And I think that's not only unlikely, I think it's bad advice. I think that understanding a lot of what he said,
Mhm.
understand the social niceties, understand how to toast and how to shake hands, as I've explained to students, and how to tie a necktie, as I've also explained, and how to stand and how to speak and how to write and all of those things, those social expectations, those are important.
Yes,
But those are not who you are. Those are the oil that lubricates the machine is not the machine.
true.
So I think of Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes was fictional character. He's a unique individual.
Mhm.
Dr. Watson was the ordinary man by comparison. Watson represented Conan Doyle.
Yes.
Holmes was a singular individual with his own quirks and idiosyncrasies, but he understood all the social aspects, all the social graces. He could write, he knew what clothes to wear, he knew how to address people by their titles, he knew how to travel well and without complaint. He knew all those things, but that's not didn't define him.
Well, and he failed often to be perfectly polite
Yes,
because of his intellect.
yes. He was
So,
intellectually arrogant.
yes, and that was his one of his quirks. So,
Yes,
but I think now remember, and this is where we have to look back at the time this is being written. I,
yes,
that I think up until say the 60s, as Americans, you were basically taught to assimilate and be a good citizen.
yes,
And being a good citizen meant to citizenship, right? We talk about getting along with people in
right.
school. Citizenship was your ability to take part in the group activities without causing too much of a fuss. So I think he's talking about that kind of stuff, and that was part of your elementary training as a child,
Yeah,
and it carries on into your later life. I mean, in the 50s, even as late as the 50s, we see, you're it's almost become kind of a cliche joke now of the everybody's lawn in the neighborhood is cut to the same height, and you know when you went to the barbecue everybody's wearing the same sort of polo shirt and khaki slacks, and it's a this is that was viewed as how you form community by conforming,
yes.
and
Well,
community was more important than individuality until the 60s,
yeah.
really.
And in some places it still is more important in some
Yeah.
cultures. I I think that
Despite our sort of American ideal of the independent thinking,
yeah,
frontier, pioneer, make it your own way, it's a weird dichotomy that we as Americans carry on opposite shoulders.
well, and I even now I see people being nonconformist all in the same way. They
Yeah,
are they are part of this. They're nonconformist, but they're part of this nonconformist tribe. So they are wearing the uniform of this nonconformist tribe as opposed to this other nonconformist tribe. And it's just another form of conformity.
yeah,
The
right,
the things he was talking about earlier, a lot of those go into the ability to actually be an independent thinker.
right.
And that's so extraordinarily unusual anymore. Seeing somebody who will say, yeah, I don't know. I see what you're saying and I don't agree. No, over here, I see what you're saying. I don't agree. No, here's what I think. Independent of it's different from all of these things. I can justify it. I have reasons. I can cite my sources. Here's my logical analysis that leads to this conclusion. It's very unusual.
And
And
even
there
if,
are,
I think even if you can't say, you can't debate it necessarily, the person who is willing to say, I don't think that's, I don't agree with that. I've got my reasons. I don't need to justify it to you.
right,
You got your thing, I got my thing. Fine. That's
if coexistence is agreed upon.
is allowed. Yeah, for sure.
Yes, because that's when it becomes a problem when this conformist tribe and this conformist tribe each say to the other, you don't, we don't agree with your right to non be a nonconformist in this conforming way.
Well, and we see that on sort of both ends of the political spectrum
Oh
where it's
yeah,
like
yeah,
you can't, you can't, you are not allowed to pick and choose from the list of grievances. You have to adopt this platform wholesale
yeah.
or you're out. You are not, you are not one of us unless you back us up 100% on all of these things.
Yeah. And that is why I have said, as we talked about before, and I've mentioned on a number of occasions, that I call myself an ethical pragmatist.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
say what works to achieve ethical ends, but then I have to describe ethics. And so,
Yeah.
and people, I understand the need to the need for belonging, feeling that belonging to a larger group.
Yeah. We're built to do that.
Yes, we are. But I also understand, and I understand how difficult it is to disagree with the group you have previously agreed with on issues, and to the point where you no longer feel like you're can be part of that group. And even
Right.
people do that sometimes for trivial reasons, but it can be significant for significant reasons. Um, so yes, um, I this last thing made me think of um, what was that the Jim Carrey movie where he was actually it was an artificial environment. He was in a bubble.
The Stewart show? Stewart? No,
No,
no.
no, he was
The free, no, it was the something show. Truman Show.
Truman Show. That's it. And what you said about all the wands and all of that, it made me think about that, or Stepford Wives, or
Edward Scissorhands.
yeah, any number of those sorts of things. Um, yeah.
And I'm all in this kind of situation. I'm always reminded of the Twilight Zone that I read as a short story in seventh grade, I want to say, sixth, seventh grade, before seeing it on the Twilight Zone of the monsters are coming to Maple Street, I
Oh
think,
yeah, yeah. Oh yeah.
where
Wow.
it's just a weird, like the lights are going out and everybody panics. So they've been this nice community. Everybody sort of got
Yeah.
along. I mean, we didn't like this about you, and we suddenly all these things become these horrific issues. Like, well, you're a damn foreigner. You don't, you had him over at our barbecue last week. That's
Yeah.
stressing people out shows who they are.
Yeah. For good or ill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was an interesting, particularly in the time in the 50s when that show was on.
Yeah. Oh, the Twilight Zone was extraordinary
Oh,
in
yeah.
what it did. I watched all those, and there was one that, well, combination of the Cuban Missile Crisis and an episode of the Twilight Zone. I don't think I slept for years.
But not well anyway.
No, no.
Yeah, so I think this last sentence is not as well written as most of the rest of this article,
Yes.
because I think that he's, you know, a
It,
parent's basic ambition to be very different. What does that mean exactly? We said,
yeah,
well, that means exceptional because that's
yeah,
fairly common. And yeah, you kind of hope your kid will excel and they'll do good in school and they'll get a good job because you want them to be safe and comfortable in their lives and manage to be almost exactly like the people you want them to be different from. I yeah,
yeah.
doesn't that doesn't ring correctly to me either. So
So years ago, there was in the National Lampoon magazine an article titled "How to Write Good," and it was really funny article. And it said, if you're writing and you don't have an ending, just have everybody suddenly be run over by a truck. And then went on and described a bunch of other things. And at the end, the last sentence was, I would continue, but suddenly I'm run over by a truck. And his concluding sentence sounds like he was suddenly run over by a truck.
right, he'd said everything he had to say and he didn't have a conclusion for his thesis.
Exactly.
He'd This is one of those situations I think where he'd made his thesis at the beginning. He'd stated
Yes.
his thesis and his conclusion in the first paragraph. And you're kind of taught, well, you restate your thesis at the end as a
Yes.
conclusion,
Yes.
but he missed that part. Now,
Yes. And I think that if he had done that, that would have been a better conclusion.
yeah, yeah.
So,
All right.
okay.
So
So I think that once again we have covered another list of life skills that
mhm.
and we've looked at several of them, and we'll add this one to the list. And we've talked about along the way about what we agree with, what we don't agree with. I think we should, well, we did come up with ours, and we call it the virtues, the
Yeah,
chivalric virtues. So that's
yeah, and it serves us just as a kind of a, well, touchstone, a framework, a
mhm,
decision making
yes.
aid, I
And they're
guess.
not specific skills, they're principles, which I think is in some ways more useful.
Well, yeah, it guides you to the skills you want, right? I've got
Exactly.
these principles. I need these skills to be able to hold and execute these principles. So
Exactly.
one guides the other.
Huh. Good.
Yeah.
All right
So that's
then.
end of part two.
Yes.
And this was a struggle because I finished my drink at the end of part one.
Oh yeah, and we didn't make because
No,
we simply rolled into this and didn't each make
right.
another beverage.
We
So
we sacrificed libation for continuity.
yes. Um yeah, unless people think that we've been wearing the same clothes for 2 weeks.
Yeah, right.
So
So
okay.
thanks
Yeah.
again for coming to our second part of this discussion. Again, like, share, uh, comment, send us your ideas for new new material. We're going back to 1933 for stuff. We could use some more current questions, and we know you've got them. So, would you like to send us out, sir?
So until we see you next time, be thou
A good night.
and true.